Oh, I thought I put it on. There it is. Right. Okay. So we're looking forward to a very interesting session this afternoon, where we're actually going to look at which we've been sort of debating around the edges of the topic that we're going to be listening to this afternoon, but it's around sort of social security or social protection in low-income countries or in fragile contexts. So we have 4 speakers here to give us very short presentations of 7 to 10 minutes, and then we'll hand over to having questions from the audience. So I think we're privileged to have Marion Ouma, who's from the Africa Platform for Social Protection based in Nairobi, right? And we have Charlotte, is it Gornitzka? Petri Gornitzka. I should have checked on this beforehand. They got the pronunciation. Who is the Secretary General of Sida? Yeah, I was the Director General of Sida, right? So you're very important. I've just embarrassed myself there. So and Abdur Rahman from Bangladesh RDRS, which is an NGO. Yeah. In Bangladesh, you're the head of the you were the head of the training division in BRAC previously, was it? Yeah, yeah. And then we have Stephen Barrett, who's working with the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development in Uganda, and is running the helping to oversee the implementation of a social security or an old age pension program there, and working on the policy for the government of Uganda for about the last 3 years now, is it? Okay, so could I hand over to Marion first?
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marion Ouma. I work with the Africa Platform for Social Protection. This is a Pan-African organization that's based in Nairobi, registered in Nairobi, but we do our operations. We work with civil society organizations and governments across Africa. First, I would like to thank HelpAge and the Church of Sweden for the invitation to participate in this conference. And I must say that I'm deeply honored to be in your midst. Such great trailblazers on social protection and people who've talked about social policy, people that I've learned from. And it is an honor for me to stand before you and make a presentation. I will talk about social protection in low-income countries, and particularly in Africa, because that's where I've worked, and that's the experience that I have. And first of all, I'll look at the trends, what's currently ongoing in Africa in terms of social protection. And then I will look at some of the limitations or challenges that are being experienced within the continent. And then I will look at the opportunities that we have in moving social protection forward in the continent. I think, first of all, I would like to talk about policy and legislation, the policy and legislation debate that's ongoing within the continent. And I think in the past three years, we've seen quite a number of countries coming up with policies and strategies on social protection, meaning that there is thought behind the programs that are ongoing. And we're seeing governments that are writing policies, putting them into law. Examples are in Kenya, for example, in Cote d'Ivoire. We know in Uganda the process is ongoing. And we're having plans that are finally starting to shape the direction that most countries are going to take in terms of social protection. We know how much and how critical law is when it comes to the legitimization of processes and programs. And this is a trend that's catching up, and so many countries are in the process of doing the policy and the strategies in regards to social protection. Something else that's happening is the politicization of social protection. And we're coming to an age where then social protection is being talked about not just in boardrooms, but in election campaigns. Parties are having social protection as part of the manifesto programs in terms of social development and social policy. governments are starting to put in place ministries and ministers that are in charge of social protection. And the beauty about this is that then you have a citizenry that is involved in the social protection programs in the country. And when it becomes an election campaign, like it happened in Sierra Leone last year when they had elections, and actually social protection was one of the electioneering, one of the things that was being discussed in the campaigns for elections, then you know that the state is starting to build contracts with its citizens in regard to social protection and putting money into these programs. There is an increase in public fund allocation. I know for many years and for a long time, most of social protection programs have been funded through funding from international development organizations by donors. And slowly, and we don't know how long it's going to take, and it is in selected countries, not in all countries, but countries are starting to put money, their own public funds and budgetary allocation onto social protection programs. And we're seeing an increase in that, example being in Uganda, where the government is starting to make a budgetary allocation onto the social protection program. We're seeing this in Zambia, though to a small extent. We are starting to see an increase of public funds, because people are asking that these programs have to be extended, these programs have to be expanded. And the public fund allocation, and the money comes from the budgetary allocation, we know that there is then the ownership by government of these programs. There is legitimacy of having these programs, rather than having the old discourse that we had before of funding that is coming from donors, and therefore you cannot hold the government accountable to it. Governments are moving, they're putting a shift, and we are seeing in some countries that the amount of money that was coming from donor funding that was directly going to people is reducing as the government funding increases. New partnerships are also being formed within the continent, and I think the old, what we call the old partners of social protection, they're still there. We're still having DFID, we still have UNICEF, we still have the World Bank, but increasingly we are seeing like the Japanese, like JICA, coming in to support social protection programs, and also there is partnership with civil society organizations. And whereas the discourse before was being held mostly by development partners and governments with lack of citizens in the discussions. This is starting to grow, and there's new partnership that is coming between governments and civil society organizations. A number of civil society organizations and national platforms that we work with are participating in the design of programs, maybe not to the extent that we would like, but we're seeing that participation starting to increase. They're participating in the policy-making process, maybe not to the extent that we would like to, but it is starting to grow. And we hope that with time, space is going to be created for citizens, for locally owned and locally grounded organizations and civil society organizations to be great participants in these partnerships. A lot of innovation and learning, is coming out of the continent. Innovation in terms of how the payments are being done, and we've seen from the old way of payment, when it used to be done at a certain point, we're seeing the use of mobile technology in terms of payment, which is saving quite a lot of, is cutting down quite a lot of administrative funds. We're seeing countries are starting to think, and governments are starting to think beyond the box that has been put in terms of this is a program that you have to do, but governments are deciding to do things that then they feel are the most needed for their population. And a lot of learning is coming out of even the targeting, the debate that we had. How do you make targeting better if you're going to do it? We support universal coverage of programs, but then if the targeting has to be done, how is it then going to be done in a way that is acceptable, that is most efficient, although we know that it is very difficult to do this. But learning is coming out, and people are drawing out of the experiences of Africa and being able to implement their own programs in the countries that they work. And there is also a shift from pilots to national programs. I know we talked about pilots a lot, and particularly in regards to Zambia, where we know there have been quite a lot of pilots, many pilots. And the program, from single programs that we had, multiple programs in a country, you would go to a country and you have multiple programs, multiple tiny programs. But then there is now the shift to consolidating these programs into national programs that then have a wider coverage. I have 2 minutes, I think. Now, if I just to touch briefly on the challenges that are being experienced. I was thinking of changing this after the discussion that was here in the morning, the limited funding and coverage. But when I mean limited funding, I'm not saying that governments necessarily do not have the money to put this in social protection programs, but it is about prioritization. Our government's prioritizing social protection programs. And therefore, you find that the amount of money that is allocated for social protection is still very minimal, whereas we know that governments could do much better than this. Efficiency of the programs, because of the way the programs have been designed sometimes, because of the targeting that goes into the whole process. Then the programs, or sometimes they're spread within many ministries. You find that it is not efficient to run such programs, and sometimes there is limited capacity within governments to be able to run these programs very efficiently. Elite capture is another challenge that we're experiencing, where you have discussions of social protection that are exclusive, are not inclusive of populations, and particularly the people who are going to benefit or to be selected in these programs. And in many countries, you find the people who are leading the discussion is the international donors, is the World Bank, is the UNICEF. But you don't find a lot of civil society organizations leading leading the discussion or being part of the discussion. And it has been captured, and it is an exclusive, it's almost an exclusive club in some countries, and you find the same people who are talking about it, who are driving the agenda, and you leave out so many people are left out of the discussion on social protection. And then I'm sure there's no word like this but in English, but the siloization of programs. We're seeing silos, and programs are in multiple ministries, many programs, and every program is in a silo, and it's in many departments, a department or something. And yet we know that social protection is part of social policy, and it should be looked at from that perspective and not just as a small program. Then the welfaristic approach to social protection, vis-a-vis what we talked about, the right-based participation or approach. But opportunities are still there. We have opportunity to increase the participation and the voice of citizens. We have the opportunity to enhance the systems of social protection in Africa. There is the, maybe through public-private partnership, which is growing a lot within the continent. And then also because of the minerals and the resources that are being discovered, there is opportunity for redistribution, for use of the funds that are coming out of the oil resources, the carbon, and all these resources that are being discovered in Africa, to be able to redistribute this to ensure that there is equity in social protection and in our social policy programs. Thank you. I think my time is up. Steve has just told me that, I think. Thank you. All right.
I think then we'll have give people the opportunity, because I think there's a lot of interesting things you've said. So now I think we'll hand over to Charlotte.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Charlotte Gornitzka. No offense. I'm the Director General of Sida, and I'd like to share with you what the development agency working on behalf of the Swedish government is mandated to do, how that corresponds with the opportunity to get engaged in the area of social protection. Some examples of what we do, and I'd like to end with some of the challenges that we face and that we would love to actually get some help in trying to fine-tune how we can be working better as a development agency. So Sida is mandated to work on behalf of the Parliament and Government bilaterally in countries, but we also work regionally and globally with the thematic priorities that Sweden has set out for us to do. What's important for everything we do, and actually what's now being emphasized in new strategies, is to be long-term. A country strategy today that we implement is around 5 to 7 years, and that gives opportunity to plan long-term and to be predictable as a donor/partner. We think it's very important for us to see how we best can support the fundamental drivers of development, not be the developer necessarily. We think it's important to understand the context in which we work. How can we design our contributions in such a way that is, and I risk to use a word that we use too often now, inclusive, to really take into account the people and the institutions that has to be there from the very beginning, based on rights and needs and realities of the people we work with, the people that are poor and the poorest of the poor. A basic principle is ownership. There has to be ownership by a country or a government or an institution to build long-term contributions with and on. And we also try to see how the way in which we work and the contributions we support are with democracy, with democratic values, translated into action, obviously. We try to work, as I said, in a context, in knowing the situation in the country where we work. We also want to play, even more so today, I think we always have done that, but maybe we are tailoring that a bit even further now, is to be the catalyst for change, knowing that despite the fact that Sweden is a big donor and that aid is anchored in our society, we know that other financial flows are exceeding aid very much so, and we need to be clever on how to work with other resources and flows. And maybe the best thing we can do is to work with others and sideways rather than directly implementing ourselves. So we try to be a catalyst for financing through the capital market, for instance, for partnerships, and really see how we can be part of a development where national resource mobilization could actually be a basis for social protection in the long run. So we need to be clever on the role of the catalyst for change. We seek, as I already said, to trigger other flows of capital and to also to be part of building systems that are robust over time and that can be self-sufficient. And what that means is that we actually try to stay away from projects where we think that's not possible. And sometimes that's difficult for development agencies or actors to actually say no. So that's important part of what we do. So that's the overall kind of view of the development agency. So what has this to do then with social protection? What gives us the mandate to include that in our work? Well, if we look at the OECD DAC's definition of social protection, I'm going to read that to you. Maybe you know it, you could read it to me, but I'm going to read it to you. Social protection, according to OECD DAC, is an investment in people. It enables households to invest in productive activities and human capital, which raises their productivity and incomes. It also helps women and men living in poverty to adopt more sustainable strategies to tackle their vulnerability, to increase their resilience, and to pursue more effective strategies out of poverty, i.e. more effective participation in the labor market. So that definition kind of clearly sets out that we are not only mandated to work with social protection, it's also very important for our overall mandate, which is fighting poverty or eradicating poverty. So now I'm going to give you some examples of what we do. So against this backdrop or background, we recently joined, and now we know why we need acronyms, the World Bank Rapid Social Response Multi-Donor Trust Fund. And the acronym is as long, so I'm not going to... it's a trust fund targeting social protection, and Sweden is, through Sida, is a donor around $10 million. This fund is about implementing the World Bank's social protection and labor strategy, and it's pertaining to resilience, equity, and opportunity. And when we support this trust fund, we're going to work actively on trying to learn from the experiences that this trust fund will both enable and be involved in. The focus is activities at the country level and on system building, strengthening social protection schemes. And collaboration is also done with UNICEF and World Food Programme, and as you know, we have heard, they have long-standing experiences of working with social protection in different settings. We also support NGOs in doing this, and nobody, I mean, we all know HelpAge by now, don't we? There you are. HelpAge was helping us to put on the map the fact that we are getting older, and that's an opportunity, but also something to really work with. I have a background in working with and for children, and we're not supposed to fight, I think, different parts of life, but very few focused on the fact that a larger population becomes older, and we need to address this. And so we know that HelpAge is also working hard to get social pension as part of the social protection schemes. So Sida is one of the donors, and that's another kind of way to engage in social protection systems. Right now we are involved in 4 African countries: Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, and Mozambique. But we're also looking into, and especially in Tanzania, we are in kind of long-standing discussions. We're working to get engaged in Tanzania, Uganda, and Zambia. I think one can say that Sida is engaging more in the field of social protection rather than less if we go back some years. I think the example from Tanzania is a good example to learn from. It's not easy. We are in close discussions with the government and other actors that need to be coordinated and all of that. The World Bank, USAID, DFID, and different UN agencies. And it's about scaling up the Tanzania productive social safety nets. The program is both unconditional and conditional, trying to incentivize poor people to use health clinics and to turn up in school. It's also promoting small investments offered to the participants so that they can grow their business. It tends to scale up by the end of 2015 to reach 7 million people, which corresponds to 15% of the population that are the poorest of the poor. And this is 2 minutes. I'll make a promise. This is a very ambitious goal for Tanzania, and what is so crucial for us to work for and understand is that a substantial government contribution is needed to keep this program long-term and sustainable. And that's the real challenge while entering this, is to what can we do as a donor to make sure that the government takes its parts and know what it's embarking on and discuss it in relation to other parts of their budget, like the health budget and priorities. Very important. So, I could give you more examples, but I won't because of the 2 minutes. But I'd like to share with you that one of the important things that we need to do as an agency, but a challenge at the same time, is coordination. So many actors are trying to find their way to support. And in conflict countries, where we do too little today. That's where we're supposed to focus our overall aid development in conflict and post-conflict. We do too little. We have asked the World Bank to look into this and to help us to map the current situation, and we can see that there are many small initiatives, but not necessarily coordinated, and there is no strategy. That's very important for us to kind of to contribute to and see to that there is a strategy. So my question to you, colleagues, and the, well, not audience, but to you in here is, what role would you like to see a development agency mandated like Sida is to have? What can we do and stay away from? And how can we improve actually the social protection work we do where it's most needed in conflict countries? We haven't cracked that yet. Thank you.
Right, thanks very much, Charlotte. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions for you. A bit later.
Thank you.
So now can we pass on to Abdur?
Very good afternoon to all of you, and I'm from Bangladesh. As you can see that my presentation is going to be on Bangladesh and particularly the government activities. I'm not sure because for the last 2 days you have been listening to different accents, and one of my Brazilian friends was mentioning about the English of different parts of the world. So maybe you are going to listen some, we call it Bangalish, so Bangladeshi English, okay? So if you find it very difficult to follow me, then you can raise your hands and ask me. I'll try to repeat what I have said. So because the accent is totally different sometimes, so it is very difficult to follow for a few friends from other countries. First of all, thank you very much for inviting us, the organizer, and particularly the Church of Sweden, for giving us this wonderful opportunity to attend this international seminar on a burning issue, the social protection, social security, social assistance, and all these things, and to educate ourselves, to take some lesson back to our country so that we can also try to implement all these ideas, and also to share our experience, little experience. Before I start, can I ask you one question, that how many of you have been visited Bangladesh? Have you? Oh my God, wow, it's fascinating that many people you have been to Bangladesh. Yeah, it's encouraging because some people, even they do not identify this country, where is it located, they understand that Bangladesh is a part of India, which is not true, We are a sovereign, independent country, and we got our independence in 1971. If you know the history, I'm giving you a little background because that will help you, because the context of Sweden or the Nordic countries and the developing countries and the context of Bangladesh is totally different. If you have not been exposed to those countries, you will not understand what I'm going to talk about. So it was a part of Pakistan, and then in '71 we fought for our liberation, and the liberation war was for 9 months, and finally we got separated. We divorced Pakistan. So it was 2 parts, East Pakistan and West Pakistan. Now we have become the Bangladesh. So it's an independent sovereign country, and we started our journey from '72, you can say. So it's 41 years old country, okay? I'm not representing the government, but the moderator, he used to work with the government, Bangladesh government, so he might knows better than what I know what government is doing in Bangladesh. I'm representing a development organization called RDRS, but time does not permit me to speak about the activities of this organization. Well, as I said, that it's a small, geographically, it's a very small country, 148,000 square kilometer, which is maybe 1/3 of Sweden, your geographic location, and population is 160. I'm giving you some context so that you can understand. The 160 million population in 147,000 square kilometers. So the density of population is very high. It's more than 1,000 per square kilometer. So you can now imagine, you know. And historically, Bangladesh has never been ruled by any Bangladeshi. That's another perspective you need to keep in mind, because it has always been ruled by the outsiders, by the British, by the Mughals, and by the others, you know. So we did not have any past experience of ruling a country, an independent country. We did not know how to run, how to operate an international airport and all these things, you know, the administration of the country. So we had to learn in the process how to manage a country, how to manage the whole system, the administration of a country. Anyway, so within the given time, as you can see that I have altogether 8 slides. It shows 1 of 8, so there are 8 slides. I will take maybe 1 minute per slide to just cover my time, okay? And the first one is welcome slide, the last one is thank you slide. So there are 6 slides basically, okay? Right. Okay, let's move to that. In Bangladesh, basically the government has introduced a number of social safety net programs, we call it SSNPs, the social safety net programs, and all these programs have not been started at the same time. It evolved based on the changing needs of the society, basically. So the program that we had in 70s or 80s, that has been changed over a period of time, and the program that we have now, okay? So I'm talking about from the government perspective, they call it social safety net program, and they have broadly classified all these programs into 2 major areas. They call it the social protection, one part, and the other part is social empowerment. So broadly, all the programs, I mean, there are 93 programs. I'm not going to give you the exhaustive list of all these 93 programs. So can you imagine there are 93 social safety net programs, okay? So let me just remind you on quotation from the renowned sociologist and economist of this country, Swedish Nobel laureate perhaps in economics, the Gunnar Myrdal. Somebody was referring to his literature yesterday several times in his presentation. So Gunnar Myrdal, the way he has defined the development, that is much more applicable for the developing countries like Bangladesh, you know. What he said, development means improvement of the host of undesirable condition in the social system that have perpetuated a state of underdevelopment. I think it's clear to you that it means the improvement of the undesirable condition in the social system. So there are lots of undesirable conditions in the social system in Bangladesh and my country, okay? So we need to touch upon, we need to address all those undesirable conditions and convert those undesirable conditions into desirable conditions, then perhaps we can have the expected and long expected development in our country. But with this number of population, the huge population, it is also a big challenge for the government with the limited resource to address the needs of every segment of the society, as you were talking about the targeting or universalism, all these things. So with the limited resources and heavily dependent on the international donors community like World Bank, ADB, and all these things, for the government, it is also difficult. And the political aspects of these development countries is totally different. I'm not sure whether you have heard about the Bangladesh politics. You know, we have to pass through a lot of political turmoils. You know, it's never stable. The economy is fragile, as has been mentioned here. The democracy is also fragile. The democracy has not been yet taken a good shape. So we are struggling to have a democracy. And what I personally believe that democracy is a precondition. Good governance is a precondition for the development of the country, which we lack in Bangladesh. We are struggling. And in every state, there are 3 elements, I would say, that the business community, the civil society, and the government functionaries, okay? But in our country also, somebody mentioned that the civil society is not playing their role up to the mark. They're not raising voices in favor of the poor people. And even the government, they are highly, I mean, a society is highly politicized, and in every 5 years there is a election, and a lot of tension before the election. Our next election is going to be held in early January 2014, so the political unrest is another problem. If you visit, you will find a lot of strike, hartals we call it, everything stand still, nothing moves, so a lot of problems, but still we are struggling and taking our economy forward. The government has formulated a perspective plan from 2011 to 2021, and government is trying to convert or take this country from a low-income country to a middle-income country. So, and we are on track. We believe that we are on track. And in most of the MDGs goal, we are on track, except the MDG goal 7. Okay, I'll go a little bit faster. So you can see that there are food security program, because in 1974, after the liberation, we had a great famine. You might have heard, few thousand people, they have died because of the food crisis and all these things. Food was in the market, but the people did not have enough money to buy the food from the market. So some programs started in after that famine period. Food for Work, VZD means Vulnerable Groups Development Program, VZF, Vulnerable Groups Feeding Program, Food for Education, and Open Market Sale. These are the basic in order to address the food insecurity of the country. So government has introduced a lot of programs, which is food for work. So if there is no work, government provides food and building the culverts, roads, and all these things. And VZD and VZF, these two programs is absolutely to address the condition of the women. These are a little bit gender biased, you can say. It's not, more gender sensitive program, because the VZD and VZF is absolutely for the poor women, disadvantaged women segment in the society. And Food for Education, this is a very good program. Our education program is, the primary education has been declared as free. Only 2 minutes? Okay. And then employment, because unemployment is a major problem of the development countries. So government has introduced the 100 days employment generation scheme. So government provides some work, 100 days work for the youth who are unemployed. And we have also introduced allowance for widows and distressed women. Women are the most vulnerable segment in our society because of 2 reasons. One is they're women, and the second because they're poor. So government has some special program very focused to address the issues of the widows and distressed women and abandoned by their husbands. It's very common in our society. And old age allowance, it has been a little bit talked by our moderator before in the previous session. And we have also introduced allowance for the insolvent and the disabled people in the society. And you can also see some of the posters, although these are in Bangla. So I'm sure you cannot understand, but you can see the pictures, yeah? We have program for the disabled, for the blind people and the other sort of disabilities. Although we do not call them disabled, we are also disabled, differently able people. And you can see we have the old age allowance pension for them. And we have maternal facilities and other things. Particularly, we have another option for the freedom fighters who fought for this country, for the liberation of the country. So government is providing the financial support to those freedom fighters. Well, allocation, just to give you some idea, you can see the GDP, we are spending highest 2 percentage in 2011 and 12, and it has been declining gradually. Even in terms of the total budget, you can see. So government has made a commitment that in the next, it's also political commitment sometimes, because it's it's a power game. The ruling party always try to remain in the power, and the opposition, they always try to pull them down from the power, so it's a power game in the country. So you can see they have made a commitment that next year, perhaps, I will stop. Next year, they're going to increase it into 3%. It has never raised to 3%. In Asia, in South Asia, the average expenditure for the social safety net programs is around 4%, but in Bangladesh it is maximum 2.2 or 2.3%. and in East Asian countries it is 8%, so we have to go a long way. Anyway, lessons learned or recommendation made by the experts and made by the researchers that if we can go for all these things, we need high level of political commitment, of course, effective program management and delivery, because there are many loopholes in this service delivery system, and better targeting of the beneficiaries, because sometimes we find that the people who are well off, they are also taking the benefits of these social safety net programs. And there are leakages, minimum, so we have to minimize these leakages, and the improvement of financial management, strengthening monitoring and supervision, and government is now trying to focus, and government has introduced the central database system, because there are some overlapping of the same services. One man or one person is getting more services, okay? So there is a database under the process. Well, impact, there are a lot of impacts, but I'm not going to discuss all these things. But what we have seen that most of the people, if it is cash transferred, they try to use this cash for income generating activities, like for instance, the old age allowance. We have seen that 19% of them, they have used this money for goat rearing, poultry rearing, or small sort of businesses, okay? Well, the role of RDRS, as an NGO, we are trying to basically create the awareness among the community so that they can bargain. There are a lot of activities under the list, but the main purpose of NGO activities in Bangladesh is to mobilizing the community and strengthening the community, building the institution of the community so that they can negotiate with the existing power structure and establish their rights. That's briefly I can say that. So some of the photographs you can see that the first picture shows that she has got a visiting card, and the second picture it shows that workshop, we organize a lot of workshops on the rights, and then widow allowance and all these things, and old man, and he's preparing something made of bamboo. Thank you very much. This is our national flower in Bangladesh, but I would like to complete with your permission, the moderator, a quotation from the African National Congress, from the office of Mandela, Nelson Mandela, the great leader icon, yeah? What is written, I'm quoting from ANC office. Once it was displayed in his office, but now I'm not sure whether it is there or not. We talk I mean, we, the people, we talk too much about all these issues, social protection, social system, and all these things, social policies. But it says, I request humbly to all of you, just, this quotation is very powerful. I'm very highly touched by this quotation, so I'm repeating it. It says, I was hungry, and you set up a committee to inquire into my hungerness. Days passed. I was sick, and you compiled a report on my sickness. Month passed. I was homeless, and you held seminars on my homelessness. Years passed. I am still sick, I am still hungry, I am still homeless. So let's try to come out of this situation. Let's try to have a better society. Let's try to have a discrimination-free society in terms of anything, religion, ethnicity, sex, gender, or anything. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Abdur. That was really interesting. I think Bangladesh is an interesting moment now where it's now trying to rethink its whole approach to social protection. So this is a very good basis for any future discussion now. I'd like to hand over to Steve Barrett, who will be speaking to us about Uganda. I've got a particular interest in this because Steve and I were both involved in designing this program in 2009. So we can see now what kind of progress has been made since it was left in Steve's hands. Hopefully it was going all right.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you to the organisers for inviting the Ministry to present. One of my colleagues from the Ugandan government would have been here today, except they're busy with the Vice President actually celebrating International Day for Older Persons and in one of the programme, the pilot districts. So they felt that was a priority, so they sent me instead. So you have to make do with me for the time being. That said, it's important for me to emphasise that I'm here in my own personal capacity. The views that I express are not necessarily the views of DFID, the government of Uganda, or Maxwell Stamp, who directly contracts me. You might, as I go on, you might see why that's important. I also want to apologise for having a terrible cold, so I hope you can understand me. Today I'm going to talk through the experiences of the expanding social protection programme in Uganda. I believe this programme is of interest to us today because so much progress has been made in such a short period of time, and that's despite enormous challenges in Uganda. And in that respect, I think the programme, the country stands out from other countries in the region. I think yesterday Charles showed you the graph with us, that sort of island of grey in the middle of that global map, where little progress has been made in terms of national scale social pensions, in particular in sub-Saharan Africa. Most of these programs, most of these countries are sort of somewhat plagued by pilots. Those pilots have rarely moved to scale, and national level processes have tended to be characterized by protracted debate around policy and perpetual pilots, and quite a fractious and disjointed approach from the various stakeholders. And I think that some of the lessons learned from Uganda could be relevant to improving and the chances of progress in some of these other countries. My presentation is divided into three parts, or four parts. The first thing, I'll give you a very potted history of the social protection agenda in Uganda over the past decade or so. I'm then going to look at what I call really the three main challenges to expanding social protection in Uganda, how the expanding social protection programme and the Ministry of Gender has addressed those challenges, and maybe conclude with some lessons learnt. So, a potted history of social protection in Uganda. In 2002, the Ministry of Gender first started considering social protection through its Social Development Sector Investment Plan. It included it as a thematic area of concern. And that's kind of things where things stopped for 4 years. That social investment plan was never funded, and no progress was made. Out of frustration, in 2007, the Ministry of Gender sought support from DFID to design and fund a pilot cash transfer scheme. And that scheme really resulted in more a sort of cash transfer project, let's call it. It was a proxy means tested, conditional cash transfer. It had very little sort of political identity, and there was all sorts of discussions around how it would be implemented, whether NGOs would be involved in implementing it or not. And its rationale is very much linked to chronic poverty. As a result, I would say, Cabinet refused to approve it. That pilot, the Ministry took the proposal to Cabinet, and the Cabinet said, no way, you're not implementing this programme. Thank you very much, DFID, for your offer of your money, but we're not interested. So in 2008, 2009, DFID commissioned a review team, which included Stephen and I, to review the original design. And we proposed two subcomponents of a universal social pension and a targeted vulnerable family grant. Excuse my cold. This proposal was approved then by Cabinet in July 2010, although if you look back at the Cabinet documentation, they only actually refer to the Senior Citizens Grant. There was no referral at all to the Vulnerable Family Grant, the targeted scheme. First payments were made in 2011. Later on in 2011, the Office of the President essentially dismissed the viability and the political acceptability of the Vulnerable Family Grant. And then last year, in November last year, the government allocated its first financial contribution to the Senior Citizens Grant of around $750,000. Just last month, or a couple of months ago, the President then instructed the Ministry to agree a national rollout plan for the Senior Citizens Grant with the Ministry of Finance and publish that national rollout plan in the media. So what you can see is a massive shift from Cabinet refusing to even consider the idea of a pilot, even funded by development partner money, in 2007, to the President personally requesting the Ministry to agree a national rollout plan for the Senior Citizens Grant, a universal scheme, this year. Excuse me. Okay, so this slide here shows you, just tells you a brief summary of the pilot. It shows you that we're in 14 districts with around 5,700 communities. The pension is universal, age 65 plus, except in Karamoja, which is a particularly disadvantaged area of the country where we reduced the age threshold to 60. We have around 100,000 direct recipients and 500,000 total beneficiaries. It's implemented by a project management unit of which I work in partnership with local government authorities, and payments are delivered through a mobile money service provider. I'm not going to dwell on the techniques of it because the story is really in the politics. That just gives you, I thought I'd include a picture so you could see the sort of the payment modality. I can ask some more questions about it later, but it's essentially a mobile money-based transfer system. And there is the President, His Excellency the President, launching the program last year. So let me go on to the three challenges that I see in Uganda. The first is what we call the public policy challenge. And essentially the key issue here is that policy discourse in Uganda is no longer poverty-focused. It's entirely growth-focused. And those growth models do not incorporate issues such as inequality of opportunity. All interventions are, government interventions that are being proposed are essentially supply-side interventions, and there's very little interest in addressing social protection as a theme from a rights-based perspective. Yeah, that's been manifest, for example, in the recent rejection of proposals for a minimum wage. There's also very much a residualist understanding of the role of the state when it comes to social security. Essentially, there's a preponderance to emphasize the role of the family rather than the state in dealing with vulnerability and poverty, coupled with the fear of establishing culture of dependence on the state, which will undermine productivity and competitiveness. And this is, of course, linked to an understanding of poverty being caused by laziness and damaging social attitudes and behavior rather than limited opportunities and exposure to risks. The other major problem is a lack of consensus on the strategic definition of social protection. This is caused by, excuse me, I'm sorry, an allergy to welfare among the government of Uganda, which led to a desire to downplay social transfers as a core policy instrument within social protection. Institutional interests within the system, which were looking to attract investment for a myriad of underfunded programming proposals targeting vulnerable groups and livelihoods. And people looking for, with a well-intentioned desire to return to a poverty reduction agenda, who are looking for a new conceptual framework to hang their advocacy on. Then there's the political challenge. And the first challenge here is that the government feels the need to constantly reduce expectations on the state so that service delivery failures have less of a political impact. Essentially, the less you commit to delivering, the less the political impact when you fail to deliver. So when you want, since social protection necessarily involves raising citizens' expectations, there's a fear, a political fear of doing that. Public financial management is also being undermined by a desire for maximum flexibility in public expenditure to respond to the political conflict that's in the system. And there's a resistance to making large recurrent commitments that will reduce ability to respond to those political conflicts. Public policy making is constantly distracted by political conflict. Those that know Uganda will know some of the history of political conflict in Uganda and where we're going over the next few years. And there's a lack of political dialogue over policy issues which affect the majority. There's essentially a lack of politicization of social policy. Decision-making is highly centralized, and there's a lack of cross-governmental decision-making on social policy. In fact, there's no really institutional home for social policy. And of course, civil society is incredibly weak. The final challenge is the institutional challenge. And as I said, there's no institutional home for social policy. And I would question whether there should be one as such. I mean, I think Marion was talking about the fact that there's different programs split across government. I think to a certain extent that's natural. As I said, there's also centralisation of decision making, but the Ministry of Gender really has an identity crisis, and you can tell that from the acronym Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. It really doesn't know what it wants to be, what its strategic focus is. It has very little credibility within government. And its approach to policy development and policy promotion was highly simplistic and reflected its crisis of identity and crisis of confidence. It doesn't. Yep. It really didn't know how to engage with the Ministry of Finance. We also there's a fundamental problem of absence of the state at local level, a misunderstanding of decentralisation, and also a weak financial services sector. So, how are we addressing that? I'm running out of time, so I'll pick on just a few of these. The first thing is we're engaging with the Ministry of Finance on their growth models and actively promoting the idea of inequality of opportunity, and I think we're making some progress there. Most importantly, within the Ministry of Gender, we needed to get them to agree on a strategic definition of social protection that they could actually go out and make a case for investment in. But then we actually really downplay the social protection as a concept and focus on simple programming proposals that can actually attract political interest and funding. We also certainly focus our messaging on the non-working age, able-bodied population for social transfers. There's very little space for discussing anything else. And we've also had to resist lobbyists who are seeking to make get the government to make very, very large commitments at this stage, particularly those in the child lobby. And that has involved managing donors very closely. We've also had to address the political challenge through building a politically viable narrative around the programme, around the traditional concepts of social protection in Uganda. We've actively looked for opportunities for promoting political ownership of the programmes and for stimulating local political demand. And we've had to build the confidence in the Ministry of Gender's ability to deliver. The government is very concerned about a failure, as I said, so the Ministry of Gender has to be able to demonstrate that it can do the job. We play a key role in doing that. Engaging parties through the parliamentary process. Of course, we're civil servants, and the parliamentary politics side of things is off limits, but we have to work through Parliament. And we encourage the emergence of a political vision for the social protection sector through study tour, taking politicians or study tours, etc. So they can really, if you've never had a social protection system or a social assistance system in your country, it's very difficult to imagine what one might look like. In terms of the institutional challenge, we've, as I said, building the credibility of the Ministry of Gender and its ability to deliver. Bolstering its ability to engage technically with the Ministry of Finance in debate, building the capacity of the private sector to work in partnership with the programme, and building understanding within the Ministry of Gender of the need for institutional development in order to safeguard the continuity of the programme, and supporting the Permanent Secretary to manage internal interests and conflicts within the Ministry which undermine the institutional development process.
Can you wind up, Steve?
Sorry? Can I, yeah, sure. Okay, lessons learned. The first thing to say, I think it's really important to understand the drivers of change, or likely drivers of change in a country such as Uganda. And I think they're very diverse, and I think Armando touched on some of these, but I think they're much broader than what he was talking about. Looking at competition between political elites, the desire to consolidate power and demonstrate relevance and responsiveness to public concerns, responsiveness to rapid economic and social change, and I think if you look at the programs have been introduced in response to the HIV/AIDS crisis in different parts of the world, there's examples there. Compensating for other painful economic reforms, democratic demands, responsiveness to public concerns, constitutionalism, and responses to historical injustices. All of these things play different roles in different contexts. I think you have to understand the context you're working in order to pitch your strategy correctly. The other really important lesson, I think, is that social protection policy discussions are often conceptually flawed. And this completely confuses lower-income country governments such as in Uganda. For example, I noticed today, in the past couple of days, why are conditional cash transfers known as human development programs while social pensions are not, despite them having very similar impacts? Why do we talk about agricultural input subsidies or maternal health voucher programs and free primary education in the same breath as old age and disability pensions and unemployment benefits? What's the difference between social assistance and social insurance when social insurance schemes often require substantial state funding guarantees? What happened to social security? I think that's an issue that Stephen raised the other day as a concept. And this is really, this conceptual confusion has emerged from the social protection policy community over the last 10 years and plays itself out in the protracted policy debates at country level. And this is really delaying progress. The other lesson, I think, is that ministries of social development often require significant capacity building and support to build their credibility within government and improve their bargaining power vis-à-vis other branches of government. They also need support to manage the internal conflicts that will necessarily arise as they look to expand their role in social protection programming, and also to avoid the various pitfalls along the way. I think the other lesson is that donor-funded pilots, and here's a contentious proposal, can actually be useful in a country such as Uganda, where there's absolutely no experience of non-contributory social security, if, and only if, national governments are allowed to take ownership of them, and the lessons that are emerging from them. They are designed with a view to long-term sustainability, institutional sustainability, fiscal sustainability, and also political sustainability. They're exploited for the purpose of building political interest and commitment, and clear timelines for decisions around scale-up or wind-down are agreed upon. I would also say the affordability debate needs to be seen for the red herring that it is, and that's what we've very successfully done that in Uganda by proving that the National Senior Citizens Grant can be rolled out by only using a tiny percentage of the annual revenue increase year on year over a 5-year period, between an average of 3% per year of the annual revenue increase. No need for expenditure switching, borrowing, or even using oil revenues, for example. You have to understand the political economy of targeting, and I think the discussion, the way in which the VFG was rejected, the way in which the original program design was rejected by Cabinet, and the way that the current program has been so rapidly adopted by government tells you a little bit about that. And I think it's also important to know that different people within government are often different, better and worse judges of the political economy situation in a country. Civil servants are often actually not very good at judging what their political masters are going to judge to be acceptable, and that's certainly an issue we had in Uganda. And lastly, international NGOs can actually play a very important role, as long as they're willing to get down and dirty with some of the politics of social protection in a country such as Uganda. One final message, and this is really, I want to respond to maybe some of the points that Jimmy made yesterday. I realise that the vision and the progress that we've made in Uganda, the story I'm telling you, isn't particularly transformative, maybe. It's a story of pragmatism in an extremely challenging political economic, a very challenging political economy. And the hope of our programme is that we have been catalysing change. We will create space for a more transformative agenda to emerge in due course. But that is a guess. Thank you very much.
Right. I'm sure a lot of you have a lot of questions. I think we've had some very interesting information given here. While you're just getting ready to ask your questions, I'll keep my eyes open and put your hands up, please. I mean, I think I just had to add a little bit to what Steve said. I mean, when we designed the program in Uganda, we designed it according to what we understood the political economy, and we knew that when everybody wanted the poverty-targeted program, it would never be taken up. That's why we persuaded them to go for a universal option, because we knew that had the best chance. I think it's pretty amazing that within 4 years of total opposition in Uganda to any form of cash transfer, the President has asked for the national rollout of this program. I mean, I think it's pretty amazing progress. Anyway, let's start there. Yeah? Oh, we're starting there now. Then we'll go to, yeah.
Thank you for those presentations, especially on, okay, sorry about that. On low-income countries, especially in the context of fragility, and where many of our countries in Africa do find themselves. Let me make a comment first on the last presenter. When you talk about the answer to poverty, it's hard work. But here what is missing is the causes to poverty. This is not clearly defined in your presentation. We need to move a little bit one step or further in just describing the answer to poverty, especially in Africa in the midst of abundant natural resources. And if we do not understand that context, we cannot shift the answer to poverty on hard work, because in some other contexts, there's no space for hard work. I also have interest in the decentralization process in Uganda. I have lived and worked in northern Uganda, and I thought that Uganda and Rwanda had the perfect example in terms of state and local government level. But here you say this is a major challenge. The presence of state and local government is not there anymore. But what I saw 5 years ago, just before you went in, was that they had a perfect model where they had councilmen And these councilmen and women were being paid by the national government because they represent the national government. Yeah, if I go back to the previous presenter, especially Marion, I'm interested in the issue of accountability and transparency as we discuss social protection. But let's also redefine that to say the missing link of our own people to have trust, lack of trust in their national government, in fragile state, in developing countries. They don't trust because basic social services cannot be delivered, even if we pay taxes, even if we pay the money for social services, we still don't have it. As I conclude, example in Liberia, where I come from, the Speaker of Parliament, his deputy, the budget for this year for the Speaker of Parliament and deputy is more than the Ministry of Health and Social Welfare. How can I trust such irresponsible government to pay taxes to the government, to allow the government to save a percent of the little salary I get every month, and after 25 years, you're never going to get that money back from government.
Thank you. You would take the next question up there. Does anybody else have questions in this round?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the panelists because there was a very informative session, so thank you very much for that. I have a particular question to Mrs. Gornitzka about the work that Sida is going to be developing in the coming years. I mean, as you know, there has been at the international level a great level of consensus around the concept of a social protection floor. We discussed this morning the ILO recommendation. There has been also an endorsement of the concept of the floor by the United Nations General Assembly. I think the G20 also makes some explicit reference to the social protection floor. So I would like to know to what extent this trust fund of the World Bank is going to build upon those consensus and is going to integrate the different elements of the floors that were agreed upon at the international level, and linked to that, to what extent Sida, actually in the countries in which Sida is active, to what extent is Sida going to help building national social protection floor in those countries? Thank you very much.
Anybody else in this round got a question? No? Well, let's go. I think the first questions were divided between you two, and then come to Charlotte.
Okay. Just one clarification maybe on the presentation. I skipped the point of that quote I put on hard work. That quote was actually from a very, very senior politician in the Ugandan government who's saying that the only way out of poverty in Uganda is through hard work. And what he was basically saying is there is very, very little role for intervention by the state for addressing this problem. It's, as I said, it's part of the sort of residualist approach to social security that it dominates the political discourse and the public policy discourse in the country. And that's the challenge. That's the challenge. In terms of decentralization, Uganda has taken a bit of a step back in terms of its decentralization. So it promoted a policy of decentralization for years and then really never saw it through. So local government really lacks capacity and if you look at the lowest level of the state, really, which is a sort of parish chief, only in a lot of places only around 30% of those posts are filled. So the state is actually absent from in terms of its ability to actually provide any services whatsoever at community level. So there was incompletion of the decentralization process. On the other hand, there's also a misunderstanding of the role of local government in social security and social assistance service provision. And there's an assumption that all programs, irrespective, should be implemented through and by local government. And that's very much not the case particularly in social security. And South Africa is a case in point where actually the courts took the responsibility for implementation of social assistance away from provincial government and took it back to central government because local government really lacks the capacity and the mandate to play that role. So we're fighting a battle to actually get the government to understand the importance of setting up an appropriate institutional framework for managing social assistance programs. And that's what I meant by the challenges of the decentralization policy. It's incomplete and it's misunderstood.
Abdur, I think you had a question that was probably very pertinent for Bangladesh, the lack of trust in government. Why are you paying your taxes in Bangladesh? Because probably exactly the same story that we heard could be claimed in Bangladesh.
Right. Let me also address partly what the gentleman was asking about the causes of poverty. The way we perceive poverty, actually, I'm not sure about the African context, but I'm talking about the Bangladesh context. The poverty is not only the lack of income or lack of financial resources. The way we perceive poverty is a interlinking social, political, economic system that are deeply entrenched in the society. So we believe that there is no magic bullet or there is no single right way that you can shoot and poverty will be eradicated, you know. So poverty, as Dr. Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate, the way he has defined, he has classified the poverty into two broad areas. One is income poverty, another one is human poverty or the capability poverty. So in order to take the society forward, I believe that we need to address both income poverty and the capability poverty or the human poverty. Because having a large number of population without the proper sort of education and training, I would more emphasize on education because one of the speakers in this morning, he was also emphasizing, I mean, education, education, education. He repeated 3 times. So I also believe that education is the passport of social inclusion and development. So countries like Bangladesh should put more focus and allocate more budget to educate the whole nation, I mean the country. So we need to address both the income poverty and also the human poverty. Okay, coming to the lack of less trust, it's true. Trust, the way I consider trust is an emotional sort of bank account, you know. This trust is necessary in our family life, in our society, in our organizational life, in our state, you know. If there is any mistrust, then a lot of miscommunication and sort of the consequence would be very negative. So earning the trust of the people, yeah, that's a big challenge for the countries, I mean for the government of the countries like us, because what we have seen in Bangladesh for the last 41 years, basically people, they don't have any other way because in Bangladesh there are 2 major political parties. Maybe you are aware of them, Awami League, the current ruling party, and the BNP, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party. So what people do, they don't have any option. They vote for one party with a lot of expectation, a lot of trust. Then what happens? The government cannot fulfill the trust of the, you know, people, and they lose their popularity. And in the next election, they go for opposite, but it's all the same, you know, it's the head and tail of a coin. So it happens the same. So that's why what we see repeatedly, the 2 parties, they're coming to power, you know. They rule for 5 years and they go out, and the new ruling party, another party, they come to power. So lack of trust is a major problem in the developing society, developing countries like Bangladesh. So the government should take some firm and affirmative action to get the trust of the people, which is absolutely necessary for the development of the country, I believe.
Yeah, no, I think one of the messages we're trying to get over in Bangladesh is, one, the majority of the population is poor in Bangladesh.
Sure.
So this targeting the extreme poor is a problem. And while these parties claim to be socialist, you're saying Bangladesh's got a classic neoliberal economy, low taxes, poor quality public services, targeted at the poor. You need to start thinking about this and the taxation and perhaps build in legitimacy. Anyway, Charlotte, you've got a challenging question of the social protection floor and the World Bank. So what's Sida going to do about this then?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think we are very pleased to see that social protection is being so much on the agenda, much more than before, especially around how to reach the MDGs and all of that. And I think we can say that we see more of a push for social protection, and that helps when it comes to interpret how to use your mandate. So in short, you will see Sida explore more what can we do, what role can we play, how can we sustain the values that we want to contribute with, so that we are not part of a donor group which fragment the whole. I mean, we don't need more actors necessarily. We need the actors to play a role that it's needed, a voice that may be lacking and all of that. And I think what we try to do, and that's also why I want to be here with my people, is to learn, because we can do more, and we need to be clear on the role. And so again, when we are a funder in a trust fund, it's an obligation to make sure that the objective of that trust fund, that we are good at kind of claiming and accountability for that. And obviously it's there to, I mean, the programs that will get funds from this trust fund must live up to a systemic approach, must live up to the values of the Paris and the Busan agenda and all of that. And I hope that I can say that Sida will be, I'm looking at my people here, that we will play an active role in making that part of an overall activity rather than a new actor and a new fund. And also I think, again, we have some good examples of how we have worked with social protection in kind of projects within programs, and I hope that we also can come to the table with like, good examples that like you do, and the learnings from that. So I guess I'm going to stop there. I could continue, but that's my way of trying to answer your question.
But in terms of the question was more about the social protection floor. We know the World Bank tends to be somewhat antagonistic towards the concept of the social protection floor. Does Sida then have plans to promote that within the World Bank,
Yeah,
having moved into giving them...
Yeah, I think, first of all, Torsten, we, together with the people within the World Bank who kind of fought for this trust fund to even come about, kind of, didn't we do that? I mean, it wasn't a given. Maybe I'm too open. No, but yes, I think you can really count on us as knowing the name of the game. Obviously, we're not the only ones, but we will certainly do what we can. And I know that we played a role in getting this trust fund up and running, and that we were very demanding before entering.
So we can come to you then when we see on...
Well, this is really dangerous, but yes. But I kept my promise on 7 minutes, so I guess we can keep our promise, yes.
When we look at sort of in Nepal where the World Bank is trying to push for means testing of the universal pension, they're a very un-Swedish thing. We can come to you and you're going to sort of talk to the World Bank.
So I think next question.
Let me say something.
Any other...
Steve, let me say something in regards to the point that was raised there, in terms of accountability and transparency in social protection programs, and particularly where public funds are being allocated into those programs. I think one of the things that can enhance accountability and transparency is the involvement of the people in the budget-making process. When you know how much has been allocated to social protection programs, and you know how it's going to be used, and you know what it's going to be used for, and therefore, and then you have civil society that's actively monitoring how it's being used and being able to report back and give feedback to citizens, give feedback to government, have discussions with governments on how the money is being used. That's one way of enhancing accountability. But it's not getting in when the money has already been allocated and the process is ongoing, but being there right from the beginning in the budget-making process. And I think many countries and many governments are starting to become very open about the budget-making process, and they're opening it up to debate in country. They're opening it up to input by various stakeholders. And that's an opportunity for civil society to start getting it right from the beginning in the budget making process, and looking at how much is being spent, how it is being spent, how it's being allocated. Because sometimes you find the budgets can be very fuzzy in terms of the definition of what's going to social protection. And you're not sure whether it's the civil servant's pension, it's the social assistance, or what they would call classical social protection. So you have to be, civil society has to be very vocal about it and be able to show to the other people, the citizens, what's happening in terms of funding. That's one way in which accountability and transparency can be enhanced, and being able to hold government to account on what they say they do.
We have 5 minutes left, so that may be a couple of quick questions. Right, I'll take those two, Magdalena, and then you.
Thank you. This question is to Charlotte. How do you ensure that in the implementation of the programs that Sida is implementing abroad, the human rights concern are taken into account? So if you go through, for example, social protection mechanism, what are the internal tools that you have in order to ensure that the implementation is rights-based?
Okay, great question. And
Okay.
lady there.
My question is about Bangladesh and the sort of the change now in terms of approach and revising the social protection policy. What is the sort of the reason behind that, and why is it happening now?
Right, we've got 2 questions. Charlotte first.
We are trying to work very much rights-based approach on everything we do, because that's one of the overarching priorities and values in Swedish development. What does it mean practically? We have tools where we try to influence and decide on whether to contribute. There is a perspective where we actually tick the boxes. Will this be an inclusive process? We ask all the questions based not on needs but on rights. So we have a toolbox which is mainstreamed in whatever contribution we do. It's not always that we tick all the boxes, because it depends on context again, but we're very much trying to be practical. So before a contribution is decided in our decision-making systems, there is questions that has to be answered and which are looked into by a committee at Sida, where the contribution as such is being evaluated based on is there a rights-based approach in this contribution, which is a mechanism that we are now developing for the whole agency. It's not based on some people who happen to know this. It's in the instrument we use, all of us. Which is probably something we could share, because I think it's important. But again, it's contextual. So it's not that it's the kind of, we tick all the boxes everywhere, but it's the approach.
Right, sorry, could you please repeat your question again?
The revision of the social protection system in Bangladesh that is about to take place, could you dwell a bit about the reasons for this and why it is happening now? What is the sort of the driving forces behind this?
Perhaps in my presentation I tried to explain a little bit the background of the social safety net programs. Basically, well, the government from the very beginning, they have tried to address the needs of the country, and particularly the poor people. As he mentioned that you see the most of the population, I mean in Bangladesh, officially it says 31.5% they live below the poverty line, which means less than $1.25 per day. So the problems are massive, and geographically, and the topography of Bangladesh is a little bit different. We have natural catastrophes. We have it's one of the biggest delta region countries. So there are a lot of river erosions and all these things. A lot of natural calamities, you know, and all these things. So the government is also, based on the situation, changing situation and changing needs of the society, government is also trying to cope up and trying to introduce new policies in order to mitigate the sufferings of these poor people. And the size of the population is also growing, and also the number of people who is getting older, the number of people are also increasing day by day. So based on this changing situation of the society, government is also changing and adopting the new policies and approaches in order to, I mean, satisfy to some extent the population of the country. So it's still, I mean, this is, as I said, that this is highly dependent on the donors community, and donors sometimes even there is a pressure from the donors, you know. So government is trying to make a balance between the donors' interest and also interest of the poor people of the country, you know. So it's a sort of challenging task for the government like Bangladesh, you know. So
I think we'll have to, I'll just complement that as I'm involved in the process. I mean, I think part of it was a change of direction in the donors in Bangladesh, which until recently had been sort of obsessed with the big NGOs like BRAC and putting all their money into that. And I think an increased recognition that actually the big programs and the big spending was within government, and that's only in the last 2 years. And I think it's more from AusAid funding UNDP, which allowed some studies to come out, which then showed how ineffectual the Bangladesh social security system was, despite relatively high levels of spending, has then allowed those messages to go through government. And now there's a sort of recognition that something needs to be done. How we need to recognize that the whole process of doing the strategy has been funded by AusAid through UNDP. So, you know, the degree of ownership within government, I think we'll have to see whether this really makes a difference. On the other hand, DFID, which I was also involved in designing a program there, is actually following a different track of designing a £20 million program, which will work within the Ministry of Finance, building a group, a social protection policy team within the core part of the Ministry of Finance, to actually from the Ministry of Finance begin to influence policy. Because during the design, we surprisingly found they were the most progressive group in Bangladesh, and we're absolutely delighted to be given that additional ability to begin to rethink the whole approach in Bangladesh. So that may have, but I think there has been this big change, and it's the catalyst of donor funding which is doing this. The World Bank's on a different track. You have sort of UNDP, World Bank, UNDP, AusAid, and DFID on one track, and the World Bank's on a different track of promoting a sort of productive safety net program with a $500 million loan, and are relatively antagonistic to the process of the development of the strategy, which is less likely to be endorsing those kind of programs in the future. So it's a very, very complex situation. Yeah. We have to see what actually happens in the future.
Yeah, very, very complex, and there is a lot of lack of coordination among the ministries and departments, because 21 ministries and departments are involved in implementing these programs, you know. So we are maybe at the very initial stage and different direction from different donor agencies. So we have to take a stand, you know, and that will take time.
Yeah. So I think we have to finish now. I think it's been some great presentations. I think we've learned a lot. Thanks for your participation in the questions. And I think we have coffee now for half an hour, and then we come back for the next session on social protection, the post-2015 agenda at 3:30.
Thank you.